Alright, hi everyone. So in this video I'm going to give a description of, or an introduction to basically this subject that I speak of, this channel and our interactions are based off of. An introduction to this, or a description of this, based on the assumption that whoever's listening has no prior exposure to materials of this nature or speaking styles like this, or the topic, so to speak. And I think this will be good for kind of elucidating what it actually is that we're talking about, because there frequently are misconceptions about what this is, what's happening here in these discussions. What the purpose of this talking about this is, or what the purpose of channels like this actually are. And within this there are a few understandings that likely need to be grasped, preferably experientially, but at a minimum conceptually, in order for the true purpose of this channels like this, or this speaking style, or these discussions to be accessible, because what we're talking about, we're always really talking about something non-objective. We're always pointing back towards the subject of experience, and because of the nature of language, because of the whole context upon which communication in general is based upon, in language we are limited to use concepts, and we're limited to use concepts confined to objective understanding. But the whole purpose of what we're doing here is to point past or back away from the objects of understanding, i.e. concepts, ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and back towards the subject that is here, that is relating to those objects. So you can kind of use logic there to see that that's actually impossible. That's not something that you can do, because you're using a limited framework in order to reach past the limitations of that framework. But it is possible. But in order for that to be possible, there needs to be an opening to the possibility beyond objective understanding as we know it. So that's the basics about talking about this, and you can see why it gets confusing. You can see why what we're doing here often is misinterpreted and often missed, and I'll try and go into the reasons for this in this video. So basically what we're doing here often has a kind of symbolic baggage to it. There are misconceptions around it. It has a kind of theme or image that is associated with it that actually has nothing to do with what it actually is. And that baggage, I'm gonna label it as a baggage here, because I don't believe it's pragmatically useful. That baggage is the theme of spirituality, or the with the associated associations of belief and belief systems. So what we're doing here has nothing to do with beliefs or belief systems. It has nothing to do with concepts at all. The confusion comes when because we are limited in language to present this message using concepts, and that just immediately gets framed into the usual means of understanding in a habitual way, and it takes the form of, or it appears to be here, a separate person talking about a belief system. And I can say that right now, that's not what this is. But in order to really transcend that limitation, and to get that, so to speak, there needs to be experiential insight into what that points to. And I can't give that through just speaking about it. Whoever's watching has to undertake an investigation that leads to that experiential insight. So there needs to be a profound level of openness to approach this in the first place. And not everyone is so inclined in that way, which is fine. It just means that what I'm talking about here isn't going to be relevant for everyone, and is not going to make sense to everyone, which is fine. That's why I don't actively promote these videos. I don't share this readily, because I know how it comes across, I know how it looks when you don't have the context, so to speak. So what are we actually doing here, and why isn't it a belief system? So what we're doing here, what I'm talking about, is a pragmatic and direct investigation of immediate sense experience. And you know, I'm going to class thought as another sense, but specifically what generates our experience of reality is partially the sense experience, but is mostly a thought experience. So specifically, we're investigating the nature of experience in mind, and you know, we'll do some experiments here to illustrate what this is all about as well, experientially, because otherwise it just becomes a conceptual thought experiment, and it becomes another belief. But part of that is we're directly investigating our beliefs. You know, what is my experience of reality? What is my experience of myself? In order to do this, we have to confront the unknown, because we're going beyond the limits of the known. The limits of the known, and this can all be confirmed in your own experience if you're so inclined, but the limits of the known are very much of the mind. It's very much a subject-object thought relationship, where the subject, me, relates to my thought experience, the object. What we're looking at here is the nature of the subject. You know, what is my experience of myself, the one seemingly that is certainly here at the centre of my experience, that is moving through life and relating to my experience. That's what we're investigating in this, and that's an exploration that goes very deep, and it's an exploration that most people aren't undertaking. I could maybe give my experience of what led me to undertake this investigation, and that was an underlying, sometimes background, sometimes foreground feeling of unsatisfactoriness with life, the feeling of not rightness, and a dissatisfaction with the experiential recognition that I don't know what I am, but I know I have a start and an end, apparently. I know I'm going to die, and something about that doesn't feel right. For me, there was a clear limit to the reaches of my mind, my ability to know, and I hit up against that limit, and something about that didn't feel right, because intuitively I knew there was something beyond the limits of the known. I didn't know what that was. I thought that was just, fear of death or something like that. But it turned out that the limits of the known are very much something that appear in my experience now as a thought experience. And the unknown is here. And the unknown is what I am, fundamentally. And what I was experiencing myself to be was not actually what I am. It was a thought experience. And that thought experience took the form of a separate subject of experience relating to a separate object of experience, the external world. And that's what was uncomfortable about it. Not the actual prospect of death. It was just that my idea that what I am is something that is limited was untrue, ultimately. And I'm not inviting whoever's watching this to adopt that as a belief, because that's, in my experience, not helpful. The beliefs in my experience were something that I adopted in order to act as a pacifier to ease the inherent and always there unsatisfactoriness, in that I couldn't find an answer to these existential questions. And if I am honest with myself, this existential question was something that was always in my memory, present at some level. So for me, the existential question had to become the most interesting thing in my life in order for me to undertake this investigation. And if that weren't so, if the personal suffering wasn't there, I don't know, but I don't believe I would have investigated this. Upon undertaking this direct experiential investigation, we come in contact with something known in the non-dual space as direct experience. And direct experience isn't something that can be known objectively because it's too immediate. The subject-object function in mind has a distance inherent in it. Distance turns out to be not real, but the distance generates a split, and that split appears as two things, me and my experience. And in doing that, it generates time and causality. It does all of that in one thought experience that's happening now. Lost where I was going with that. So this investigation that we undertake looks into experience as it is appearing now, only in immediacy, not in past and future, but now. And we start to notice things about the nature of experience that weren't apparent before because they weren't investigated directly. And at some point when we look at this closely enough, there will be a realization an experiential shift where there is a loss of the reality of that limited sense of identity, such that it no longer presents as real, no longer has the power to suggest limitation, and experience becomes unlimited. But it's only unlimited now. So what is it that we lose? Because we lose something at some point in this investigation. And what we lose is an ongoing, real experience of existing as a separate entity, relating to and moving through a separate world. Because something more real comes into experience as the primary and essential reality, so to speak. The problem is that which is more immediate, more primary than the subject-object experience isn't an object, so it can't be related to in an understandable way. And in order to approach that, there has to be a confrontation of this existential question. There has to be a confrontation of death immediately. And it's not something everyone is willing to do. In fact, for the most part, most people are avoiding thinking about it, talking about it. It just goes under the radar, it's ignored. But I feel that most people, if they're honest with themselves, at some point in their life, this existential question they've considered, and it's just that, do you really want to answer that question, or are you happy to continue ignoring it? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. Either is fine. But for me, I had to answer the question because life wasn't comfortable. When that question wasn't solved, when the problem of life and death, as it's spoken of in the Buddhist traditions, was still in the back of my mind. So, vaguely, I'm not going to go too in depth with this, but vaguely, what is the investigation? So it's an investigation of what I am, because there are assumptions that have never been investigated thoroughly and are taken for granted. And when we start to look at them, we realise that they just don't make sense. That's not the experience that I'm having. So this is when potentially when I start talking about this, if someone is watching this who's still very much living life as a separate self, as a separate subject, an identity, an individual, and very much relating to experience objectively in the world of the known through logic and reason and thinking and beliefs, what I'm about to start talking about will seem absurd. But I'm just going to tell you my experience. My experience did seem absurd, but the reason it was absurd is because this function was the subject-object function, this relationship between me and life, the knower and the known, that can only relate to objects, was so well practiced at averting from that which is here, that is beyond the limits of that objective mind. It was so well practiced that it has this aversion function built into it that ignores matters like these, that ignores something that is the most obvious experience, because it is the only experience. It ignores it because it's like it can't understand that and it doesn't want to look at it. I'm using it, but I'm really talking about me, the self. I use it because my experience of myself, it seemed like I was the subject, but when I really looked at it, it was an object. My idea of David, this character, was only an object appearing within my experience. So that raised the question, like, if I can become objectively aware of something, it's not what I am, because I'm aware of it. So this investigation starts looking into what is it that's here. There are thought objects that come and go. What I am is here. And then another thought object, and they start to appear. It becomes clear that they appear without the input of me as an autonomous agent. This experiment that I did was, I believe I'm living life based on the context that I am an autonomous agent in the centre of experience that is in control. So that autonomous agent, me, I make the decision now that I will have, if my thoughts are my own, that I'm in control of my thoughts and my experience, then I will have no thought for a specified period of time, or I will only think a certain type of thought. And quickly that experiment proves that this thought experience isn't the result of an autonomous agent that is primary to the thought experience. As this investigation deepens, it transpires that there is no inherent and autonomous thinker, that the thinker is merely suggested in the context of the thought, as in it co-arises with the thought, the suggestion of a thinker, of a separate subject. What I am, that is not an object, is simply here. Thoughts come and go, what I am is here. And it's like a process of elimination. We eliminate all of the things that come up. We come back to an observer position. We relax back to an expanded sense of identity. And then the automatic flow of thoughts, it's just based on conditions interacting with each other, itself dismantles the identity. That's pretty much the whole thing. It goes deeper and deeper than that, but that's the basis. This is called self-inquiry. Inquiring into the nature of self and the nature of experience. It's not worth going into the deeper investigations, because these aren't accessible if that initial obstruction, that strong subject-object identity function, is still fully intact and operating as if this is reality. That will be apparent if you find yourself arguing conceptually with what I'm talking about, because I've just said that this is an investigation of your own sense experience. So is the experience you're having now a mental struggle with concepts? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what's primary to that. These simple experiments show us the power of the nature of identity, and if undertaken earnestly and pragmatically and thoroughly, that identity will dismantle itself, and what is left in the absence of that isn't something that can be described, because it's beyond description. It's beyond objectivity altogether. So why am I talking about this? Why have I said that as a person appearing in front of you talking about concepts, why have I just said to you that I'm not a person and these aren't concepts, or something similar? So I am a person and these are concepts, but that's the world of the known. That reality only appears as something objective that can be related to from this apparent subjective position. None of that's relevant in what I'm talking about, so you can see how hard it is to talk about. What I'm doing here isn't presenting a set of beliefs or conceptual statements. This is the hard part to get for most people. All I'm doing here is giving a description of my experience. So I can my direct experience, and it appears to you like I'm talking about concepts. So all I can ever do is describe my experience. You can use logic to discern this quite easily. Is there this experience? Is my experience that I'm having now the only experience? Yes. So I'm always talking from my experience. It's either going to be an attempt to describe what is not a thought experience, which is impossible, or a description of a thought experience that I'm having now. So if I attempt to describe someone else's experience, that only appears as a description of a thought experience that I'm having now. That can, if you're smart enough to discern that can logically make sense. It makes sense. To really get that experientially, there needs to be some investigation into the nature of experience. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. So this has nothing to do with beliefs or concepts. Like I said, I'm going to say that, but you'll probably find that the mind will argue with that, and it will adopt automatically the belief that this has something to do with either me, the character here, or personal beliefs and concepts. It doesn't believe that. So what I'm talking about is being open to what is beyond that, which just isn't for everyone. So I'm always talking from my experience, and my experience as it appears now is at the subject-object function is absent in a real way. So that's why I can point to it. That's why I can transmit that through language, because what I'm saying is, if this can be confirmed in your own experience, if you look into your own experience, you won't find a subject, an object, separate self, time or causality, or an autonomous agent. All you'll find that's inherently here, all you'll find is a bunch of thoughts. But you'll also find what's not a bunch of thoughts, which also happens to be the very substance of thinking. And that's what I can't directly describe. But this is an invitation to look into that in your own experience. Anyway, I'll keep it short. I have a tendency to ramble, but that's the gist of it, and I'll talk to you next time.